Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David, and as ever, when we talk about European football, I am joined by Aaron as we prepare for match day 4 of UCL Fantasy. And bearing in mind the absolutely dreadful game week many of us have had in Fantasy Premier League, it could be just the perfect time to sink our teeth into fantasy football of a different kind. What do you think, Aaron?
Man, that FPL week was something, wasn't it? Yes, I'm quite excited for this one, but to be honest, the way that a lot of people feel about how their chips have went in Champions League isn't going any better with the rotation and injuries. So, fantasy football is definitely a roller coaster of emotions, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, we've been blessed in many ways. I've been thinking that a lot of the fantasy games have been kind of ticking along quite nicely, and I probably jinxed it at some point when I said that on a podcast maybe 2 weeks ago. So you can all blame me. It's all my fault for thinking that things were going okay, because, yeah, it has been a difficult time of late. But with UCL Fantasy, we've got 3 game weeks left. We're now into the sort of home stretch for some teams, of course, because some of them are probably going to qualify in match day 5, for example. We get to see them play against a team they've already faced. And so, yeah, it's the business end of the group stage coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where a lot of people's ranks are kind of determined. I think that for a lot of people, if they finish the group stage strong, they can kind of just ride that momentum into the knockouts, have very similar teams. Obviously, the teams kind of mold more and more to the same team by the time it gets to the final. So this is the make or break. A lot of it's normally match day 5 or 6, but I think last year was match day 4 when everybody had a really poor score. So it just depends on when all these managers choose to rotate, and with some of these fixtures, there could be some dangers of that.
Yeah, that's certainly on people's minds, and we're going to have a look at those fixtures in a minute. And once again, we'll have a look at Louis' fantastic season ticker that shows us not just who's got the best fixtures in match day 4, but who can offer that in combination with good fixtures in 5 and 6 as well. And as you mentioned, yeah, it could be a time where ranks are determined. So now is, of course, a fantastic time to consume as much UCL fantasy content as you can to prepare yourself for the upcoming match days. Obviously, you've done the right thing by watching this video or listening to this podcast, but also on Fantasy Football Community, one of our partners. They do the Fantasy UCL Pod, and you can follow them on X at Fantasy UCL Pod or UCL Fantasy Pod on any of the podcast platforms that you subscribe to. So, yeah, check those guys out as well. Aaron, of course, is good friends with Dan. They got a podcast of their own, so make sure you check that one out as well. Do you want to just tell us how people can find that one, Aaron? Because it's important right now.
Yeah, so that one is main event, the Champions League fantasy podcast, and a bit confusing. Our X account is UCL Fantasy Pod, so it's like the other way around. So depending on what way you type that in, you're going to find one of us. So, but yeah, that's on YouTube. It's also on all the podcast platforms. So give it a little cheeky follow and subscribe.
Yeah, basically, Fantasy UCL Pod and UCL Fantasy Pod try them both ways around. And each time you'll get a different, really helpful podcast with a continuity of guests, which I think is useful right now. And yeah, speaking of things being useful right now, do you want to talk us through how your team got on in match day 3? I don't pay as much attention to Champions League football as I used to back in the day. I'm a Reading fan. I'm just going to clarify that once again. I'm not some sort of total savage who's not interested in the world's biggest club football competition. It's more along the lines of the main thing I spotted was Jimenez going big after you tipped him as a bit of a differential. So I kind of
Yeah.
assumed you'd had a pretty good game week. You'll have to let me know if the rest of the team was able to match his heroics.
So Jimenez was my shout. I was really excited for that, and he could have had a hat trick, but it was one of his goals was disallowed. So yeah, he did really well. A lot of people didn't have him. He was 1% owned because he was an injury risk, and I chanced it, and so managed to get him in. My strikers did all really well, and it just gets progressively worse as you go towards the goalkeeper.
It's very top heavy.
Um, yeah, Bellingham again, just being just rock solid. Harry Kane providing the goods. Haaland with the 2 goals. A lot of people went without Haaland. Um, and so, kind of from what I've seen in the mini leagues that I'm in, It was a big red arrow. I'm in and around the same rank, um, but a lot of people had better weeks with their wild card. Um, and unfortunately, I substituted out Bastoni and Dumfries for their 2 points each for 2 0-pointers. So
Oh
that
no.
is that's the level of my management. Henrik's getting substituted off in the 59th minute. Could have got a clean sheet, um, which is annoying because his fullback partner got 13 points. So that was a massive swing because you could choose. People have one of them. So if you got Henriks, you got 0. If you chose Raum, you got 13. So that was a kick in the teeth. And as Blaqueta didn't play at all against Celtic, but I guess that's a good thing because Celtic did really well.
Yeah, yeah. You're quibbling over a couple of points on your bench there, which might seem silly, but actually no, it's not, because we all know what that feels like in FPL this week, especially. Some people very, very pleased to get 1 point off the bench at this rate. So yeah, it can make absolutely all the difference for sure. And it's really annoying when you go for you have a 50-50 and then you end up going for what it turns up being the wrong one, but you wouldn't know that until, after the game. It's very, very frustrating. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, wildcards were quite active in the most recent game week. I mean, do you still feel like you played it at the right time? Do you feel like your team is set up for the final few game weeks? What's the longer term view with the players and how they performed so far?
I know from the people who also play the game who played their wild card in match day 2 that they are taking hits this week, and I'm able to get by with 2 transfers before the rotation definitely starts in match day 5 onwards. So yeah, I feel like it's in a good place, and I can start to get out the players who aren't as competitive anymore, or who are maybe suffering with injuries or have tough league fixtures coming up. Man City, I think, is a big one, which is why I only have Haaland in my team. But with their Premier League fixtures coming up and Haaland's potential injury from the weekend, he's definitely someone who I guess people who went without him are grateful for, but it opens up the potential to have really different squads in terms of the fact that Haaland, the second most owned player, and Bellingham, the most owned player, are suffering with injuries this week. So I think this is going to be a massive swing in rank in match day 4.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I never wish injuries on anybody, whenever there is injuries to highly owned players in fantasy games, it is always a bit of a window of opportunity, a fork in the road for those more opportunistic managers or perhaps more pragmatic managers to use that as an opportunity to get a leg up on other people. And so yeah, you read my mind. That was my next question, was Haaland and Bellingham. Obviously heard some things on the injury front for them. Probably opens up some opportunities. I mean, are there some people you're considering for that? We're going to have a look at your match day 4 team a bit later in the show, but I mean, are there sort of like really obvious step downs from Haaland to another striker or Bellingham to another midfielder that are sort of being talked about, or is there quite a spread of options? Or you could even spread the cash, I suppose.
The I think Haaland, with him being the most expensive forward alongside Mbappe, you can get anybody into that, and that could free up funds depending on who you go for. With Bellingham, I'm a bit more hesitant to get rid of, because it hasn't been ruled out yet. Um, I would definitely keep an eye out on that because Real Madrid, thankfully, Ancelotti doesn't play around with rumors and whether this person might or won't play. He releases his Champions League squad like midday on a Tuesday, during his press conference, actually. So we'll know on his press conference who the squad is and we'll know if Bellingham's there. But even then, I'm probably just going to want him straight back in, for match day 5 onwards. And Real Madrid's group might not be sewn up completely by then. So, but with Man City, I would definitely, I'm 100% getting rid of Haaland this week because if they win this week, they just need a point against Leipzig to go through, and that's it. I think that is in Manchester. So with their league fixtures, they literally play all of the top 4, or like big teams, in the next few weeks, and so they're not going to risk Haaland in Champions League, even though he doesn't do much. We've said a ton of times that Haaland might be a rotation risk, and he never is. But the fact that he's actually injured now, he could play Alvarez there, or even we've seen like the explosiveness of Doku and other players like that. So Haaland is 100% coming out my team this match day.
Yeah, very decisive there. I mean, as you say, you can get whoever you want really as a replacement. So, yeah, and as we all say, UCL Fantasy is more of a short-term gains match. It's a sprint, whereas FPL is the marathon. So, yeah, it definitely requires different thought processes in those transfers. And yeah, very exciting for those who
Well,
like to play an aggressive game.
well, yeah, putting it in perspective, like FPL, I'm not even sure what game week we're on now, but we're game week 11. So we're coming to game week 12. This would be the last semi-final of the Champions League. So if you look at your rank and how much points can swing your rank at this moment in time, we're only 3 game weeks in. If you look at it from an FPL perspective, um, and so if this was like if FPL was Champions League, we would only have the final left after this match day. So that shows that's why I was kind of gutted about the 4 points on the bench, and it's why you don't want to take hits
Yeah.
because it has a massive swing in such a short term uh, game. So yeah, you don't want to kind of. It's not like you want to have Haaland on your bench to come back. Like thankfully, the players don't drop in price the same way that they do in FPL, so we don't have to worry too much about that. But I digress.
No. Comparisons between the two games are always I always find them very fascinating because they are very very different, and as you've illustrated there. So let's move on to the match day 4 fixtures now. To have a look at what those decisions are really going to look like in match day 4. How can we best capitalise on some of the fixture opportunities? Now, as we've already mentioned, this is the reverse of the match day 3 fixtures, which perhaps in some respects means more of the same. In others, it might mean lessons learned, and I suppose no lessons were learned perhaps more keenly than for Newcastle. Last time out against Dortmund wasn't necessarily an awful performance, but perhaps bringing you back down to earth and reminding you the Champions League is a ruthless competition rather than constantly filled with fairy tales and lots of injuries now as well. So that's the first game at 17:45 UK time on Tuesday. Dortmund hosting Newcastle, and we'll just pause on this game to start with, because of course, being a Newcastle fan, you probably got lots of thoughts about this one, and you got Gordon in your team as well.
Yeah, the fact that Gordon has been playing up front is going to stay in my team. A lot of people are shipping out the Newcastle players, which I don't blame them. A couple of people had Trippier, or they might have Shaw or Burn or someone like that. There's a lot of injuries away at Dortmund. I don't see Newcastle keeping any clean sheets for the remainder, potentially against AC Milan because they're going through their little dip at the moment, which they went through the same type of dip this time last year as well. So Dortmund really did their homework against us. The atmosphere was not up to St James's Park standards. I've heard that from like everyone who was there, and I think a large part of that is because of how good Dortmund fans were and their drum, which is just getting talked about amongst like Newcastle fans. The drum that Dortmund brought was in time with all the Newcastle chants. So it made all the Newcastle chants sound like Dortmund chants, which is just genius. Um, so Dortmund, if they were able to create an atmosphere like that in St James's Park, like it's not going to be pretty for when we actually go to Germany. With all of our injuries, I think I've read that we only have 13 first team players actually fit to make the travel, and there's going to be academy players and under 21 players on the bench. That is not pretty. And I think if you put any other team in that situation, you're going to back the other team. But
Hmm.
then again, Dortmund are a team where once you back them, they are the ultimate trolls, and you don't know what Dortmund are going to turn up.
Yeah.
So they could be the amazing ones that turned up against Newcastle, or they could be the ones that turned up against Bayern Munich on the weekend. And yeah, we don't know which ones are going to turn up, but it's not going to be pretty for Newcastle. And I think a draw is the absolute best result we can get from this match.
Yeah, just the list of those players who are red flagged in FPL at the moment. Anyway, we've got Burn, Botman, Target, Manquillo, both. Sorry, no. the other Murphy, Alex Murphy, probably wasn't going to be involved anyway. But we got Bruno Guimaraes is suspended in FPL, so he'll be back. So he's one person who isn't going to have the same negative effects on the Premier League, but certainly hasn't necessarily been in the Premier League plans, which is a bit annoying. You got Anderson's injured, Tonali, of course, suspended for some time. You got Barnes out; he's been out for a while. Isak's also out. I mean, the injury list is really, really, really quite scary for you. But I suppose it does have the advantage for Gordon. It does mean that he has more of an opportunity to play up front. So obviously, you've done a very good job of tempering expectations there, but no reason to sell Gordon, as you mentioned.
I think just for a 5.5, you're basically bringing in a defensive midfielder for around that price, or potentially some of the attacking players from Barcelona or potentially Real Sociedad. But I think a lot of them would already have that, and they're probably going to get their minutes managed anyways. Thankfully, we'll be able to see the Barcelona starting lineup. So if you do want to get rid of Gordon, um, you could go there. But I think there's other injuries in midfield and defense that people. I don't think there's going to be many people playing chips, and I wouldn't recommend taking a hit, especially because it's such a short game and that hit is massive. You're basically hoping for that person to get more. I think it's more than 7 points for your punt to be returned. It's not like, all right, I can spread that -4 over the next few weeks. It's too short of a game for that. So they need to get more than 7 points in that week for that to kind of pay off. So um, yeah, I think that's there's other fires to put out, and I don't see there's many chips getting played. So Gordon, if you do have him, I would definitely keep him, but potentially ship out some of the defenders for like a Real Sociedad defender or potentially a Barcelona defender.
Well, speaking of Barcelona, they, of course, as you say, the other 5:45 game. So they travel to Shakhtar Donetsk. Atletico Madrid hosts Celtic in the alphabetically first of the 8 p.m. So then we got Lazio versus Feyenoord, Milan versus Paris, Man City hosting Young Boys, Red Star Belgrade host Leipzig, and FC Porto are hosting Antwerp. So they're the other games on Tuesday. Obviously, already touched on Barcelona there, and we kind of also a little bit discussed the Man City against Young Boys game, which fixtures really stick out for you here? It may be the same answer you gave for match day 3, or might be completely different. Maybe some teams surprised us with how they got in match day 3 and tempered expectations for match day 4.
I think Man City are going to heavily rotate, and so I think that's definitely going to be an interesting fixture, but it's going to be hard to predict from a fantasy perspective. Hopefully, we can get some insights closer to the deadline. Um, it'd be great if this was the early kickoff and we could see their lineup. I think they're the early kickoff. Actually, no, they're not. I think it's not until the match day 6. But I think players like Grealish, I think Rico Lewis, I think he'll play, and he got player of the match last time. Um, and I think it's just seeing who didn't play on the weekend. I think that's ultimately how we judge Man City lineups. But in terms of other fixtures, Leipzig against Red Star Belgrade, I think that's an interesting fixture as well because Leipzig played really well, and we have a lot of their assets. Rom played great, Henriks played great. Well, other from a actually in person perspective, not from the 0 pointer that he got. Um, but also Simons played really well. Openda in the league has scored back-to-back braces, so he might be a shout for striker. Um, but Atletico Madrid against Celtic, Celtic are always going to make that match hard in Scotland, and they've got some famous victories over the years. But Morata is in fantastic form, and I think Morata is a great shout for someone who's looking to go maybe a Haaland down to a cheaper player to save some money, maybe get another premium midfield. And then obviously you've got Mbappe. The thing about the group of death is that because they play on the Tuesday both days, that also the chance both match day 4 and match day 5 is that they're going to feel the strongest 11 in all of these match days. So people might have avoided them earlier in the group stage because it's so unpredictable. But now it starts to flip where we'll know that they need to they need to play their strongest 11 in all of these games, so they actually become safe options despite the result being a bit unpredictable. But with Newcastle's injuries, Paris Saint-Germain might and AC Milan going through their lull, Paris Saint-Germain might be a team to invest in for the remainder of the group stage.
Yeah, definitely worth having a look at them for sure. And yeah, you're right. Like factoring in what day these teams play on is very, very useful because, of course, with the Tuesday game, going to have a little bit more rest ahead of your next league fixture. Not the same for the Wednesday group though, where we have Napoli facing Union Berlin. We've got Real Sociedad against Benfica, Bayern Munich against Galatasaray, Man United travel to Copenhagen, Arsenal host Sevilla, PSV versus Lens, Real Madrid against Braga, and Salzburg versus Inter Milan are the Wednesday fixtures. What stands out for you from these?
Napoli did a really good performance against Union Berlin. Union Berlin are not do performing the same level as they did last season, and that was kind of expected. It's a similar story to Newcastle, where they've not been in the Champions League. Newcastle have been before, but Union Berlin, this is their first ever time. So even just getting here was a great achievement. And I think they're feeling the effects of that now because of the lack of investment. They didn't have the same funds available that Newcastle have. So they're starting to feel that now. So Napoli at home is a great shout. Di Lorenzo got a great amount of points last game, and that was away. He was very close to getting player of the match, but Kvaratskhelia got that instead. So I think, but Di Lorenzo is a great shout for anyone that needs to downgrade any defenders because he's still 5.5 and due a price rise. Um, just not in terms of a good way, but to avoid this fixture, Salzburg versus Inter. Inter have rotated their starting 11 every match day so far in the Champions League. Um, we may have like I've got triple Inter, and that is a big concern for me. They're not going to play their strongest 11 because they're focusing so much on the league because they believe they can qualify with their B team. So we've already received a lot of rumors that Alexis Sanchez is going to be the striker, that Martinez or Thuram will be rested. It's just too much of a gamble, especially on the Wednesday, to play any of these Inter players. So I would look, unless we receive like any sort of hints, you just look to ship out your Inter players if you're able to go forward with your transfers. Don't bother taking a hit because the Inter defender can still get 4 points due to ball recoveries, but it's not worth an Inter um, taking a hit for an Inter player. Bayern Munich, they could tie up qualification this match day if they win, just due to their head-to-head with Man United. Um, so that's also I think it's not necessarily the tied up qualification, but they would have to lose by like a ridiculous amount of goals to not qualify. I think they would only have to lose to Man United by 3 goals or something like that in order to not finish in first place. But they will be guaranteed top two if they win against Galatasaray. Arsenal against Sevilla is an interesting match because of the Odegaard injury. How do Arsenal play without him against Sevilla, who they're a tough team? So, but Saka is a great option. I still believe that he's such a good player that he's a good option. But Real Madrid against Braga, I think, is the one that we probably look to invest in. Even with Bellingham's injury, you could go Haaland to Vinicius Jr., but you could look to get a few Real Madrid assets in just due to this match being really good and them having a safe floor.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly Real Madrid don't necessarily rely entirely on Bellingham, unless, of course, it's an El Clasico at the Nou Camp, where he obviously did the work. But yeah, it's a good fixture all the same for them, definitely. And what I'll put on the screen now is the season ticker at large, which still has all 6 game weeks on, so we can sort of have a look at how teams have progressed through that. From what you've told me about Matchday 4, which teams in particular stand out as potential investments now that would continue to offer value in Matchday 5 and 6? Because we've kind of already touched on this already. We're moving towards the business end. of the group stage, and we might see some rotation from some teams. It might come down to which teams have quite a lot to play for, perhaps, or maybe even teams that get to face a Bayern Munich in match day 6. I mean, that could end up actually being an advantage. I mean, what sort of dynamics are at play here in terms of assessing long-term fixture value? Which seems like a weird thing to say when it's only 3 game weeks, but in the Champions League, of course, that is quite some time. So, yeah, what's the latest on this?
So you want to look for teams that are round about like either close where anyone could finish anywhere. So the group of death is a great example of that. Also, Feyenoord's group with Atletico Madrid and Lazio. That's a really close group. So they're probably going to have to go all the way to match day 6. It's the teams that have walked through the group that you kind of want to look to ship out of your team or look to get some of their lesser known players uh, where they'll have to still perform really well. So if you're able to successfully predict the Man City lineup, that's going to be great. Some other people, they don't like the risk. Real Sociedad will be a good group as well with Benfica and Inter, just knowing that Inter are not going to play a full strength team. Real Sociedad are currently top. That's a great group as well. Um, with Bayern Munich, I mean, I would never say facing them at any time is easy, but it's similar to a Man City where if you can predict some of the lineups, then that's going to work out really well for you. I think the biggest question with Bayern Munich will be Harry Kane and how much minutes does he get in the Champions League past this point. Um, but Bayern Munich haven't lost a group stage game, and something ridiculous like over 30 games consecutive. They've not lost a group stage match, so they'll want to keep that streak alive. But hopefully that answers your question. Either a tight group or a team that still has it all to play for. You kind of also want to be looking for the league fixtures. So, for example, Man City, they play Chelsea, then Liverpool, then home to Leipzig, then Tottenham, and then it goes into the December rush of fixtures. So their match day 6 against Red Star Belgrade, that I think that's going to be rotation City before they go to the Club World Cup. So Man City, I've said it so many times, but look, try to get them out your team.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of teams, then let's have a look at yours and how it's shaping up for match day 4. As you mentioned, Haaland out to Vinicius Junior is the one you've got currently in your team, and you've got Bellingham. Not Bellingham. You've got Simons in midfield. Who have you sold to get him in?
Yes, so I got rid of Galeno. So I didn't mention Porto earlier, but they've got a few injuries. So Galeno's one of them. He's not been officially ruled out according to the site, but he is injured. And according to a few like Portuguese league experts, um, they they say that they don't actually like him in the team. They feel like it's almost like a Ronaldo at Man United effect, where he makes the team worse because of his style of play. So even though his heroics in match day 1, he might not be getting played. So I've shipped him out, which is annoying because he was a 50-50 decision between him and Simons. And Simons ended up getting an unbelievable score in that match day 3. I think he got 13 points. So it's them 50-50 decisions, isn't it, that end up coming to bite you in fantasy football. But yeah, so Haaland out, Galeno out for Vinicius Junior and Simons, but Simons could be anybody because obviously I've got 0.9. Sorry, I've got 1.2 in the bank.
Nice. Yeah, those 50-50s, man. They're always coming back to bite you. And the thing is, you've talked about Simons a lot on these videos as well. So it's even more annoying when you predict that they'll do well and then they do exactly what you thought they would, but you don't own them. It's very annoying. Indeed. What about your captaincy plans and your substitution plans for the match day as well? I mean, obviously they're going to be based around the Tuesday games, Wednesday games. Who are you giving an opportunity on Tuesday? Who are you going to be using as backup on Wednesday for both substitutions and captaincy?
Yeah, so with the Tuesday games, you have an opportunity to go really differential because there isn't a standout captain. So me and Dan, we always said that captaining a fullback on the first day is a great shout because their ceiling for points is so high. So Cancelo, I think, is a great shout. because he has the potential for ball recoveries, clean sheet, and attack and returns, which we know Cancelo can get. Um, so I think that that's a great shout. If we know that he's in the starting 11, thankfully we'll get that as well. So you know that your captain is definitely playing when we see the lineup. And then other than that, it's really kind of wide open. You could go Morata against Celtic, which is I think that's a really good shout. I could go Jimenez against Lazio because of his great performance last time, even though he's not scored since and he missed a penalty on the weekend. Um, Mbappe, I guess, is a shout as well against a struggling AC Milan. Um, but yeah, I think it's kind of just them options, to be honest. I think it's a massive gamble. You could try and chance it with a Man City player, knowing that you're going to just switch captain the next day. So if we hear that, like, for example, if we have Foden as starting, that could be a great shout. But this is the opportunity to really punt, knowing that we have safe captains on the Wednesday that we can change our captain to.
Yeah, so I see you've got the armband currently on Harry Kane for the Galatasaray game on Wednesday. Is he the standout alternative in a world where Bellingham is kind of unlikely to play against Braga, from what we understand?
Yeah, for me, it's either going to be Kane or Vinicius Junior. I think it's going to depend on how the Tuesday goes, and then how brave I'm feeling at the time. Because the issue with this game is once the starting 11 gets released, it's just panic central. Like all your logical thinking goes out the window. And then that's what happened when I was finalizing my wild card. Um, I was like all these players and all the arguments for each player just they get muddled up, and you're just panicking because the starting 11 has happened. But with in terms of the Wednesday, if I don't panic or make like a silly Tuesday transfer, um, Harry Kane will be the captain. If I just need to secure the amount of points that I've got, like if my Tuesday has went well, um, then Harry Kane will be my captain and go with the consensus. As long as my captain on the Tuesday didn't do unbelievable. If I need to try and climb rank and I need to try and do and make up for the Tuesday, Vinicius Junior will be my captain.
Okay. Yeah, and that's handy that you can sort of have it as a bit of a utility decision. You could go one way or the other depending on how Tuesday goes. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, very useful. And as I always say, interesting perhaps to FPL managers who want something more hands on. Although, as Aaron has just described, knowing who's in the team before the deadline, well, let that be a lesson to those of you who want the FPL deadline to be like kickoff, because yeah, it's
it's
not.
yeah, you're just gonna panic. It's not nice.
It's a poison chalice. All that information, you'd rather I'd rather not know. I'd rather make my decisions and avoid than make them with chaos swirling around me and things that I think I know, but maybe don't know from a team sheet. So, yeah. Well, fingers crossed, the early deadline isn't going to leave you panicking this time around, although you've only got 2 transfers to make. So, probably only 2 decisions it's going to affect rather than, 15. But yeah, of course, that deadline is tonight, of course. And match day 4 will be kicking off very, very soon. And so before we go, just a quick reminder to, if you've not already checked out the Fantasy UCL pod or the UCL Fantasy pod, which are actually 2 completely different titles there, make sure you go and subscribe to those on your chosen platforms. And yeah, give them a listen over lunch in the afternoon, and make sure you check them out before that match day 4 deadline. And of course, if you found this video useful, don't forget to like this video on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Hit that bell notification. We have one of these videos out for every UCL Fantasy match day deadline. And of course, if you found us through that and you haven't really seen us with our FPL content, which I'm going to suggest is unlikely because we're sort of a little bit more well known for Fantasy Premier League, but if you didn't already sort of know about us, or perhaps you've watched a couple of videos but you haven't subscribed to the channel, then make sure you do that. It's a great way to support us. It's free, of course, and it means that you will not miss any content as and when there are new game weeks, either in FPL or UCL Fantasy. So yeah, hit that bell notification as well to get notifications of those videos. That's everything I need to pass on to the viewers and the listeners. Aaron, is there anything else you'd like to add before we let them go off to their matchday 4 prep?
No, just if you are making transfers, even though the ones on the screen that I've just done are both Wednesday fixtures, it is good to look at the split of Tuesday, Wednesday. Um, just one last tip that I just remembered. So make sure you've got a good balance and you're not left with too many Wednesday players.
Yeah, balance, perfectly balanced as all things should be, is what an FPL team and a UCL Fantasy team should look like. So yeah, do bear that in mind. But with that, we shall leave you fine, folks, to enjoy the rest of your prep for the next match day deadline, and we shall see you next time. Goodbye.